Who are you? Are you everything you hoped you'd be? Do you feel called to become someone besides who you are now? Sometimes we don't seem to fit in the situation or the place that we find ourselves. Sometimes we are destined for more. In Hind's Feet in High Places by Hannah Hurnard, the main character, much afraid, is called to go on a quest with the shepherd to the high places. Now, much afraid is exactly as her name describes. She is frightened to go, but she knows the shepherd loves her very much. After many long days of trials and detours, Much Afraid finally makes it to the high places with the help of her companions, Sorrow and Suffering. Upon arriving, the shepherd gives Much Afraid a new name, which is Grace and Glory. The shepherd also informs Grace and Glory of her new identity as a daughter of the king. Here's where we pick up. "This is your new name," he declared. "From henceforth you are Grace and Glory." Still, she could not speak, but stood silent with joy and thanksgiving and awe and wonder. Then he went on, "Now, for the flower of love, and the promise that when it blooms you will be loved in return." Grace and Glory spoke for the first time. "My lord and king," she said softly, "there is no flower of love to bloom. In my heart it was burned to ashes on the altar at thy command." "No flower of love," he repeated, and laughed again so gently and joyfully that she could hardly bear it. "That is strange, Grace and Glory. Then how did you get here? You are right on the high places in the kingdom of love itself. Open your heart and let us see what is there." At his word, she laid bare her heart, and out came the sweetest perfume she had ever breathed, and it filled all the air around them with its fragrance. There in her heart was a plant whose shape and form could not be seen because it was covered all over with pure white, almost transparent blooms, from which the fragrance poured forth. Do you remember, Grace and Glory, when you looked into your heart beside the pool and found that my kind of love was not there at all, only the plant of longing to be loved? She nodded wonderingly. That was the natural human love which I tore out from your heart when the time was ripe and it was loose enough to be uprooted altogether, so that the real love could grow there alone and fill your whole heart. You tore it out, she repeated slowly and wonderingly. And then, "Oh, my King and Lord, were you the priest? Were you there all the time when I thought you had forsaken me?" He bowed his head, and she took his hand in hers, the scarred hands which had sown the thorn-shaped seed in her heart, and the hands that had the grasp of steel, which had torn out the love which had been the cause of all her pain, and then kissed them while tears of joy fell on them. "And now for the promise," he said, "that when love flowers in your heart, you shall be loved again." Taking her hand in his, he said, "Behold, I have set my love upon thee, and thou art mine. Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness have I drawn thee." Jeremiah 31:3. After he had said, "Give me the bag of stones of remembrance that you have gathered on your journey, Grace and Glory." She took it out and passed it to him. and then he bade her hold out her hands. On doing so, he opened the little purse and emptied the contents into her hand. Then she gasped with bewilderment and delight, for instead of the common ugly stones that she had gathered from the altars along the way, there fell into her hands a heap of glorious, sparkling jewels, very precious and very beautiful. As she stood there, half dazzled by the glory of the flashing gems, she saw in his hand a circlet of pure gold. O thou who wast afflicted, tossed with tempest, and not comforted, he said, behold, I lay thy stones with fair colors. He picked out of her hand one of the biggest and most beautiful stones, a sapphire, shining like the pavement of heaven, and set it in the center of the gold circlet. Then, taking a fiery blood-red ruby, he set it on one side of the sapphire and an emerald on the other. After that, he took the other stones, 12 in all, and arranged them on the circlet, then set it upon her head. At that moment, Grace and Glory remembered the cave in which she had sheltered from the floods, and how nearly she had succumbed to the temptation to discard as worthless those stones, which now shone with glory and splendor in the crown upon her head. She remembered, too, the words which had sounded in her ears and had restrained her. Hold fast, that thou haste, that no man take thy crown. Supposing she had thrown them away, had discarded her trust in his promise, had gone back on her surrenders to his will, there could have been no jewels now to praise him, and no crown for her to wear. Then she heard him speaking again, and this time the smile on his face was almost more joyful than before. Hearken, O daughter, and consider, and incline thy ear. Forget also thine own people and thy father's house. So shall the king greatly desire thy beauty, for he is thy Lord, and worship thou him. The king's daughter is all glorious within. She shall be brought unto the king in clothing of wrought gold, in raiment of needlework. The virgins, her companions that follow her, shall be brought unto thee. With gladness and rejoicing shall they be brought. They shall enter into the king's palace. Psalm 45, 10 through 15.